give me beef again and embarrass me in front of my friends on the internet, I'm going to end you. And give it a sexy bit of code. I'm going home. Well, we're going to censor actually, but it's fine. And boom goes the dynamite. Did you see that? Having created our database that contains quite a bit of data regarding our sensors connected to the Raspberry Pi and various readings collected from those sensors, it would be useful to be able to interact with that database in a user interface rather than needing a SQLite console or a terminal on the Pi to be open to inspect the data at all times. One way of doing this is to create a basic web application that users can access via the browser, and thereby exposing the database contents that way. Today we're going to be looking at doing that using Flask micro framework. It's a micro framework for web applications in that it has a simple core that can be expanded upon greatly. It does not tie you into any decisions such as specific database types, for instance, because it handles extensions that allow you to work with all of them. And similarly, all of the options and features that you want to add to your web application can be added via extensions that Flask supports. So Flask is almost like the glue that holds all of these different extensions together, and your web application can really look like anything you want. But the bare bones version of Flask has everything that you need to get a simple web application up and running in just a few lines of code, as you can see here. So we're going to do just that. Obviously, first we need to install. Why are you doing this? We begin by installing Flask using pip Flask capital F. You'll see along with it installs a couple of dependencies such as Werkzeug, It's Dangerous, and Ginger. Variously for templating, for creating WSGI, Werkzeug for creating WSGI packages which can be interpreted on normal web servers such as Apache. So with just adding a WSGI file, you're able to run a Python web application directly on a native web server. And today we're just going to be creating the development server for our web application, as it were. So once you've installed Flask, we're going to create our first Flask application. Added a new folder called Flask Web App. And let's do Flask's Hello World, shall we? We start by importing capital F Flask, which is the Flask class. And an instance of that class is going to be our web application. So we've imported the Flask class. We've created an instance of that class being our application itself. So app equals creates that instance of our Flask class, and the argument __ name is where we tell Flask what our application's module or package is. So since we're using a single module, this single .py file, we use __ name as this .py file is the app itself. But depending on whether this is started as an application or simply imported as a module, the name will be different. Now Flask uses this information to know where to look for the templates and the functions and instructions that contains the actual web application. Again, in this case, all of that is contained in this single file. Next, we use what is called a route decorator to tell Flask which URLs we're working with. So that first decorator with just the / telling us that this is the home page. Now we're going to define a function which must be returned whenever somebody visits that home page, and we call it our hello world. So whenever that function is called, in this case the function being called by going to that URL, so whenever a user goes to that URL, the function returns what we wanted to return. Let's just start with some basic text. Again, this being the hello world of Flask. There you go, Keats, you're immortalized. How does that make you feel? Now that we have our basic application, let's go ahead and run it. Excuse me. Now running our Flask app is different to running your standard Python application. First, we need to tell our terminal which application to work with once we run Flask. I'm in the wrong folder. On Unix systems, we use export flask_app, and we pass in the name of our application. So now this terminal session knows what Flask app we're talking about when we're asking Flask to run. That export becomes set on a Windows system. So Unix export, Windows set. And now that we have that set, we use either Flask run or Python-m Flask run. Now the terminal tells us that Flask is serving up the application helloflask.py, but remember this is a development server, so we're not deploying this with any kind of security in place. This is literally just a standard Flask application being exposed on the default port 5000, so Flask uses 5000. So this tells us that we're running on localhost port 5000. Now, since that's running on the Raspberry Pi, we're not going to be able to access it in the browser just yet because it's running as localhost. It's going to tell us that it can't connect. Now how do we get, there we go, unable to establish a connection. Now how do we get beyond that? Well, we can tell Flask, we can tell our operating system of the Raspberry Pi, we can tell the operating system of the Raspberry Pi to listen on all public IPs by including a switch called --host equals 0.0.0.0. See, now we see that it's not running on 127.0.0.1 but on 0.0.0.5000, meaning it's running on the public IP address of our Raspberry Pi. So now if we refresh, what do you mean not found? Are you not found? Why 404? How does that make sense? Right, so I'm clearly a daft fool. I was missing the app.routes at, so it's at app.routes and the URL between brackets. That's our decorator for the URL. So I was getting 404 not found because I hadn't defined a home page properly because I hadn't decorated the app.route. Again, shellware. We export our Flask_app as hello Flask. And then we do Python 3-m Flask run, specifying our host as that, and booyakasha. Okay, running on our public IP. Let's do this. So now we expect to see the text that we've defined in that hello world function for our home page. And there we go. It's true, by the way. Absolutely impossible. Such a miserable existence for that cat. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, that's what a basic Flask app looks like. So now you can add hundreds of app.route decorators with your specific subdirectories and URLs, and a function on each to return what you want the user to see in the web browser. With our basic web app working, we now need to create the functionality that will actually allow users to interact with our database tables in the application. So, in order to do that, we're going to use SQLAlchemy again, but specifically the Flask extension for SQLAlchemy. So, from Flask_SQLAlchemy, we want to import SQLAlchemy, capital SQL. Okay. No. That. Hit enter and then it just does things that you didn't ask it to do. Now we need to configure the app. So in the previous episode, we would use SQLAlchemy and tell it the URI for our database. We're not going to define that as a variable here. The way it works when it's an extension of Flask is, now that SQLAlchemy is a part of our Flask app, we simply configure the app. One of the parameters of the app's configuration will be the database URI for SQLAlchemy. So for that we use app.config SQLAlchemy underscore database underscore URI. And similarly to last time, you use that URI first specifying the database type being SQLite, 3 slashes for relative path, and let's create a little pyplant.db action. And this tells us where our database is. To avoid a warning from appearing, we also want to specify another SQLAlchemy parameter, and that is track modifications, which we want to set to false. To false. Great stuff. And now we initialize our DB. Since Flask now knows that SQLAlchemy is used to interact with the database, and SQLAlchemy within Flask knows where and what that database is, we create an instance of SQLAlchemy, capital SQL, which is our SQLAlchemy class, and we pass in the app because the app is configured to use that database. See? See what we did there? So have a look at the previous video for more information on SQLAlchemy itself. But Flask SQLAlchemy behaves like a declarative base. So in the previous episode, we had to explicitly define our declarative base and our database engine to connect. Flask SQLAlchemy behaves like that declarative base already. So a lot of the explicit definitions that we had to put into our code on the previous episode is not necessary here. Now that we've already told that SQLAlchemy what the database URI is, and we've defined DB as our SQLAlchemy connection within the app, this is literally all we have to do. We don't need engine, we don't need declarative base. We can now just start to define and map our classes for each database table. So here our base class is called db.model, and it's stored in our created SQLAlchemy instance. Table name is also something that's automatically set with Flask SQLAlchemy. So if you remember in the previous episode, we had to, when we were defining the classes, we'd have underscore underscore table name in the top. That's not necessary here either. The table name is automatically taken as the lowercase version of your class name. So with class sensor, it'll automatically create a table called sensor, and the same with class reading. This can be overridden if you set it explicitly, but the line itself is not needed if you're happy to go with a table that has the same name as your class name. So I'm going to steal some code from last time and define our two DB models over here. Now that last time we did it in reference to base, here our base is actually db.model. So we replace base with db.model, db being defined as the SQLAlchemy instance within our app, and SQLAlchemy having been configured to make use of that database. Beautiful. And all of these columns and data types, we need to append db dot to the front, where we didn't have to do that before. Now, since this is just a Raspberry Pi local iteration of our web applications, many important front-end web UI considerations can safely be ignored. All we're interested in is being able to see and interact with our database table in a browser rather than in a terminal. And it's important to note that this application is still something that's running on our internal network. It's not something that's going to be publicly accessible to anybody outside of our network. So we're going to cheat the process a little, or a lot, depending on how you look at it, by using something that's called Flask-Admin. Now, Flask-Admin is designed to provide a basic UI to expose a web service's data for admins. So if this were a real web application or a real website, each model, in our case the models being sensor and reading, each model would be a different URL that's user-facing. And you would want to have a way for admins of the website to interact with the model directly, to change definitions, or to be able to view the data in a raw way and create, read, update, and delete that data. So again, this is not something that you'd want to use to build a full user-facing website or web application, but it is something that I say it's cheating because it provides us with full CRUD functionality right from the get-go, without the need to define new functions and classes and the different URL decorators. Flask-Admin is going to take care of all of that for us. So even where our little hello world needed that app.route decorator, if we use Flask-Admin for the remainder here, we don't need any of that. Flask-Admin takes care of the web app side of the DB interaction. In fact, our CRUD interface is going to be taken care of in a single line for each table once we've initialized everything that we need. So the first thing to do is, of course, to install this. Appus interruptus with our virtual environment running. We're going to install capital F, capital A, Flask-Admin. Give it a moment. All these requirements are already satisfied on my end, since I've installed it previously. And now that we have the ability to use Flask-Admin, all we need to do is import it into our app here from Flask_admin, import capital A, admin. Again, admin with a capital A being a class, just like capital A Flask is a class and capital SQLAlchemy is a class as well. So we import admin, and we add a new line to our app.config to tell admin how we want this interface to look. So again, without writing any of the boilerplate HTML or CSS code, all we're going to do is make use of Flask-Admin's ability to use bootstrap swatches. And I quite like Slate. So now that we've added that, so this line in the config tells Flask-Admin which bootstrap swatch to use. So that's just sort of a template for how the user interface is going to look, colors and icons and buttons and so forth. Lovely. Now we're going to call an instance of our admin class. We pass in our parameters being our application, app. We can give it a name of my plant monitor, and we want to tell it our template mode, which is Bootstrap 3. There is a newer version of Bootstrap, but I haven't really bothered to look at it yet. I'm perfectly happy with the Slate theme, as you'll see in a minute. It's very cool. And lastly, the default for Flask-Admin is to exist on our web application. Again, assuming that this is a user-facing full web application, you'd have your URL /home/index/sensor/reading, which is the user-facing, which would be the user-facing URLs. Admin by default lives on /admin, but you can override that by telling it what its URL should be. So I'm going to do that and let our admin interface be our home page. So our site itself from the home page loads up this admin model view, which we'll see in a minute. And now all that we have to do is add a view as a function of admin. We essentially add a view function for each model that we wish to view, the two models being sensor and reading. So for this we need to do another import. Now Flask-Admin has the ability to interact with a whole bunch of different ORMs and database versions, and we just have to tell it essentially that we're working with SQLAlchemy. So previously when I did this project last year, I used Peewee ORM because it was quite basic and easy to use, but because SQLAlchemy is a very widely used database toolkit, I've decided I wanted to get to know that in this instance of, or this iteration of the project. So from flask_admin.contrib.sqla, in other words, from the SQLAlchemy extension of Flask-Admin, we want to import model view, yet another class. In case you're beginning to sense a theme here, it's kind of how Flask works, is every other extension or every other feature that you want to add to your web application, you import those as classes that we can work with by instantiating instances of those classes to perform the functions that we need to have performed. So we've imported model views, and now once our admin has been initialized over here, we're going to add each one of our views with admin.add view, and that's going to be an instance of model view, and that is for capital S sensor class as part of our database session, db.session. Again, note how I didn't have to instantiate a session. I didn't have to import session maker and instantiate a session the way we did with SQLAlchemy last time. SQLAlchemy sort of the Flask SQLAlchemy, I should say, maintains a global session to the database while this is running. So isn't that something? Oh, wait, we haven't declared our sensor model at this point yet, so not a good space to put it. We need to paste it over here. Booyakasha. And see the red lines under sensor disappear. Suddenly it knows what sensor is. And we do the same for our reading. Again, booyakasha. And this is literally all that we need. Automatically this add view does a URL decorator as well. So essentially our site / what would traditionally, it would by default be /admin/sensor or /admin/reading. But because we've defined our home URL as being the admin interface, this is now from home. So it's just going to be our domain /sensor will give us our sensor table and ways to interact with it, and our domain /reading is going to give us the reading. And this, my friends, is literally it. Now, if we've run our sensor reading application so as to populate and create our database and its tables, we need that DB to be in the same folder as our application here. And then we watch some magic happen. I'm going to take our existing database and copy that into our current project folder, just so that we can have a look at what that populated database table now looks like with our new fancy web interface. Take a look. So we have our pipeplant.db database inside of the same folder. Now let's go ahead and run this one more time. We want to export our Flask app. I should probably call it something other than Hello Flask, since it's much more than just a Hello World application at this point. But regardless of what we call it, let's see the magic happen. Booyakasha! Serving on our public IP address. And now, if we refresh this, would you look at that? Isn't that breathtaking? So this is the slate swatch from Bootstrap that looks like this, sort of a dark with charcoals and grays and things, very nice. But there's a lot of different options if you look at Bootstrap's site, which I'll add in the video description. So we've got a home page. All we want to do is click on sensor, watch the URL change to yo master. Righto. Why? 500, huh? The fuck does that mean, agent? Okay. So, it's unhappy because it tells us that a sensor.id column does not exist, which is patently false, but it's probably true because computers work with 100% logic and don't make emotional decisions and swear at things the way I do. So let's see where we went wrong, shall we? I mean, what are we looking at? It absolutely has that. So fine. Let's inspect the database directly and see what seems to be the damn problem. Tables, Reading in sensor there. Select everything from sensor, please. Huh. No ID after all. Bear with me. Okay. And yet here, on the first time that I built this offline, everything worked. As you'd imagine, obviously, but now it just doesn't. Let's, for instance, say dot quit. If we look at the original pipeline.db, willing to bet large amounts of money that it's exactly the same. Reading in sensor. It's easy to make those bets because I don't have large amounts of money. Ha ha ha. Empty threats. You're going to be disappointed, sir. Why does it have an ID over there? I copied it directly across and now it doesn't have an ID. What is going on? So I think what's happened here is that I've just inadvertently copied the incorrect old version of the database across. Let's try that again, shall we? Yes. Delete. But the main pipeline.db being this bad boy over here. Let's copy that one and slit it in here. Refresh. Pipeline.db deleted. Go away. Go away. Go away. Bro, literally, please go away. Okay. I don't want to view it. I want to delete it. Thanks. And now we paste in here this pipeline.db. Okay, let's try all of that again, shall we? Clear. Tiff. I'm not in the right folder, Tiff. So, but that's the right pipeline.db this time. Export our Python app and run it. If you give me beef again and embarrass me in front of my friends on the internet, I'm going to end you. So, running on localhost. Let us try all of that again. Homepage works, thank God. Sensor page. And boom goes the dynamite. Did you see that? Literally 2 lines of code instantiating that view did all of this for us. You're able to create new entries. You're able to edit or delete existing ones. How cool is all that? All of this taken care of by Flask-Admin. Thank you, Flask-Admin. You make life better. Edit record. Boom. Change whatever info we like. Save it. Add that info. Why not? Oh, well. I regret showing you that option because it doesn't work. Just pretend I didn't do any of that. Look at that. Look at that. Huh? Come on. I mean. Reading page. Similarly. Boom. And this has made life so much easier because now we can directly view, no matter how many readings we take, this gets added in here. Isn't that something? Only thing is that this home page is kind of empty, don't you think? Let's add a little bit of home page content, shall we? In order to do that, Flask by default looks for HTML templates in the templates folder, like so. And admin, Flask-Admin, looks for its templates inside of templates/admin. So it looks for its templates inside of the admin folder inside of templates. So if inside of this folder we were to create index.html and give it a sexy bit of code, we need to use the Ginger templating to do that, but I'm going to just skip past all of that and grab it from the Flask-Admin docs. So this little bit of HTML boilerplate will help us to add content to our index page, like such. So it tells it that it extends the master HTML template, and it tells it what to put inside of the body. But hello world is a little bit boring. It's been done before to death. So let's create something a little cooler, like that. Now, if we review our home page again, well, we need to, obviously it's still running the old version, so we need to edit the thing, and therefore do the thing with the other thing, and then, you know, stop the app first, clear it so that it, oh, the session is unavailable because no secret key, okay. That's interesting. So, in order to be able to edit, change, the session suddenly becomes unavailable because we didn't set a session secret key. So that is the root of that error, which I was going to ignore and just edit out of the video, but now that I have the answer, I can look all smart and stuff and put it back in. So I'm going to do that first before we rerun our home page. Bear with me, will you? So, our Flask session requires a secret key. Does it? Well, we're going to give it a secret key. As soon as we find the part of the docs that tells us how to do that. I know it's going to be part of app.config. Seriously? Seriously. Tyson. So, as part of the config, let's configure a secret key. Oh, man, why you gotta fucking do me like this? Secret key is secret. I knew. So, see if that makes a difference. When we run her again. Pew, pew, pew. Quits. Pew, pew, pew. Quits. Running. I'm going home. Well, we're going to censor actually, but it's fine. Edit test. Save. Fail to update. Attempt to write a read-only data. I never called it a read-only database. When did I call it a read-only database? So that's better. We now have an error, at least inside of our app. But, going to need to find out a little bit more before we can fix it, aren't we? I'm going home. Operational error, attempt to write a read-only database. See, it tried to do the write, but now it says my database is read-only. It's because of muddling permissions again. Can you believe it? Permissions strikes again. So, just going to do this recursively again. Sudo chmod. I'm so tired of having to do this. I mean, literally every time I copy something new into a folder, I have to explicitly tell it. I know that that's secure, but having to explicitly tell the thing every time about the permissions when you add a new thing. It's like everybody's allowed to read and write and execute, or the other way, write and read and execute. Tiff. You big. Okay, ls-l. -l. Everybody allowed to do stuff to it now? People allowed now? It's better now? It should be better now. Okay, let's try that again and see if it did a thing with a thing and a trigger wing and a export Flask app and Python run. One more time. Pew. We running? Running. Okay. Let's try that again. Sensor. Let's try and edit something. Turns out to have been chmod permissions yet again. I don't know why I still forget this. Literally every single change and every single file move that I've done has caused an error of this nature. But I forget every time, and I'm surprised and stumped and completely incredulous every time something like this happens. Booyakasha! Look at that! It even has a pop-up to tell you it was done. So, the record was successfully saved with my edit, and we can go ahead and delete if we want. I don't actually want to test on here. So, readings, same situation. You'll be able to edit here because you're able to edit everywhere else. Now, back to what we were trying to do is to just make things pretty. We've created an index.html. Oh, knuckles. Thank you. We've created index.html. And it's over there. So, if we view our home page, we've now added a little bit of text telling us what this does. And look at that. I mean, again, this is not something that's going to be a user-facing public website, but this admin interface really takes a lot of the legwork out of just creating a CRUD, create, read, update, and delete interface to interact with your database and tables. Essentially, it's an interface to interact with each one of your Flask application's models. So each model that you've defined in your app will have a unique URL, and it'll be listed at the top here, and you'll be able to go crazy. Edit things, view things, delete things, update things, create new things. Flask-Admin has a lot more functionality than just this. I must give credit to Tony. I must give credit to Tony from Adafruit, the guy from Tony's Desk. I followed along with him doing a project ballistically similar to this one. Don't go and look at it. It's not the same. It's totally different. But look at mine instead because, okay. So I must give credit to him because he introduced, I didn't know Flask-Admin exists, and Flask-Admin really made my life a lot easier in terms of creating this. So now we're at a point where we have an operational web application running locally from the Raspberry Pi. Isn't that great? But ideally, we'd want to be able to add some authentication so that not just anybody can access it, and we want to run it from a public web server, adding in SSL encryption, adding in all of the niceties of security. Well, it's not a nicety, it's really an essential. Adding in all the essential security features and running it like an actual web server. So next time around, we're going to get Apache web server on the Raspberry Pi to run our Flask application on port 80 and port 443. Won't that be a thing? So do join us for when we do that. But until next time, keep learning things the hard way. You big old man.